Hi.
Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are brand new here, my name is Nikki and this is my book nook. Y'all, I wanted to do a little bit different of a video for you today. I wanted to talk about the books that I would sell my soul to read again for the first time. This is not an original concept by any means. I've seen this done on TikTok. I've seen people do it on YouTube. I'm not claiming that I made it up, but I love the idea of it because this isn't like a normal book rec video. These aren't just like my favorite books. I mean, some of them are some of my favorite books for sure, but what these books are books that, like, the first time I read them, they just did something to me. They unhinged something, let something out, introduced me to a topic or a genre or just some characters that I just never knew existed, opened up a whole new world for me, just made me fall in love with the worlds within these books, with reading itself. Just like, all these books meant so much to me at the time that I read them. So many of them still mean so much now. A lot of them are very nostalgic books for me. I think this is gonna be kind of a fun time because a lot of these books I really haven't talked about on my channel because a lot of them I read whenever I was like a kid or in junior high, in school, growing up. Like, they're the books that turned me into a reader and just made me love reading stories and learning about new places and all of those types of things. Some books are books that I read more recently because the reason I wish I could read them again for the first time is because I wish I would have read them in like a different situation. Like, we've got a lot of different things going on here. I just want to kind of have a conversation with y'all today on this lovely Friday afternoon. Yeah, it should be a good time. I think I'm just gonna go in like chronological order of when I read these books in my life because I just think that'd be easiest. But yeah, let's just get into it. So the first book I want to talk about is one that I know so many people feel the same way about. So many people wish they could read this book for the first time because, in all honesty, it's not even a book anymore. It's not even just a series. It's a whole freaking world that feels so real and just so much a part of my life at this point, honestly, that it's hard to remember that it's fake. And when I remember that it's fake, well, let's not say fake. Let's just say fiction, not real. It kind of hurts my soul. It makes me want to cry a little bit. But Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I read this book for the first time when I was in the first grade. Believe it or not, I actually had a pretty like kooky teacher that was a total Harry Potter nerd. She was like an old lady too, so it was really funny. But we read this in her class. Like, she took a little bit of time out of the day, every single day, and she read us this book. And I was so captivated by it. I mean, as everybody is, like, I mean, the concept is just, now that we know of it so well, it's like, oh yeah, Harry Potter, whatever. But when you really think about like the world that was created in this story, just every part of it, like the school, the magic system, like the houses, the freaking plot, Voldemort, and just all the characters, like how everything just comes together at the end and stretches over a 7-book series. Like, it's just absolutely bonkers, the world that J.K. Rowling created. And it's been a huge part of my life. It's something that I love and I cherish, and I still, like, Harry Potter never fails to make me happy. Like, I can put on any Harry Potter movie at any time and it just like gives me the warm and fuzzies. It's everything to me. It's what my little lightning bolt tattoo is for, that you guys always see when I'm talking with my hands. But Harry Potter, seriously, I feel like, I don't want to say I don't appreciate it because I appreciate it so much, but it's like I don't even think I appreciate at this point in my life how much this book blew my mind when I first read it, because it's been so long. And I just, if I could start over and have my mind wiped and be handed this book again for the first time and not have any idea what it was about and just go into it, I would love that feeling all over again, and just having like stars in my eyes and be like, oh my god, I want to go to wizarding school, I want to learn magic. And then watching the movie for the first time, like after reading the book, it just, amazing. Fun fact, this book actually came out the same week that I was born, which is kind of crazy. So I've like quite literally grown up with this series, and yeah, I love it. I don't need to harp on it for too long because it's Harry freaking Potter, but yes. And the next book, really similar in aspect to Harry Potter in that it's truly just become a whole thing now. It's so much more than a book, but this book, out of every book I'm gonna talk about today, this is the one that truly, if I could read this for the first time, I would do so many things. Freaking Twilight, dude. I will talk about and love and cherish and lose my mind over Twilight until the day I leave this earth. This was the book that made me fall in love with reading. I've said it so many times on this channel. I read this for the first time whenever I was in the 3rd grade. This is my original copy. I think I was like 8 years old. Is that the 3rd grade? I don't know. I know that it was about that time because I vividly remember like being like the first person that I knew to read this. Nobody around me was reading this book. I literally was a total nerd and I loved books whenever I was in elementary school, and my parents would give me grade money for whenever I got good grades on my report card, and we would go to this little bookstore. It was like this thing we did, and the lady at the bookstore knew I liked fantasy books, and she had just gotten this in, and she was like, I think you would like this. It's about like a vampire. It would be fun. And I just took her up on it because I thought the cover looked cute and interesting. And I read this book and my little 8-year-old mind was just like blown. Edward Cullen was quite literally like the first boy I ever had a crush on. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, this book introduced me to romance, and it felt so real to me, and like I was in love with Edward, and the fact, like, the vampire aspect of it. Little did I know that I was gonna grow up and like vampires and vampire romance would continue to be something that like I just love and continue to consume. Like, The Vampire Diaries is my favorite show, but this book started it all for me. The series just, oh my god, I can't even explain how obsessed I was with this book, how much it was like all I thought about. I remember I like wanted my parents to make my room, or let me make my room into an entire like Twilight themed thing. I wanted to like paint my walls black and like paint the quotes on them. Like, I had the quotes memorized. I just like wanted to be Bella. I felt like I related so much to Bella because Bella is very much like a self-insert character. We all know that. But yeah, I mean, this was my first romance book, and it was the first book that gave me butterflies in my tummy and just like made me want to grow up and go to high school and fall in love and have an epic adventure and be a vampire. That still hasn't happened for me. Waiting any day now. But yeah, Twilight, literally will never ever stop talking about it. I would freaking, I wish so badly that I could experience this feeling again, like as an adult. We know it's not possible, but it just, so special. And the next book that I wish so badly I could go back and read again for the first time is another fantasy book. You might be able to sense a theme here that I really grew up on fantasy. It's what got me into reading, and I still love fantasy. I still read fantasy, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little more into just like literary fiction and straight up romance. But god, fantasy, I was all about it. I was all about the escapism from a very young age, and this book just did it differently because it introduced me to a subject that I ended up growing so in love with and just getting such an interest for, and I just found it so freaking fascinating the first time I ever read this book. Like, I was dying to know more about it. The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. I freaking adored this book. This book gives me a lot of the same sort of warm and fuzzies, again, that Harry Potter gives, because this is like Greek mythology version of Harry Potter in a lot of ways. You know, you've got Percy Jackson, he goes to Camp Half-Blood. It's that same like found family going off as a young kid on your own, away from your parents. You're a part of, like, instead of houses, you're sorted into the cabins. These kids are the children of the Greek gods and goddesses. I read this book in the 7th grade, and the entire month before we started this book, we actually did like a whole lesson plan on Greek mythology, and I just loved learning about it. I loved all the stories. Like, I was just so enthralled. I just thought it was so cool. I love the way that like stories from Greek mythology explain the way the world is and the way certain things are. Like, it's just so cool. These stories are just so interesting is my point, and I really loved learning about it, and I wanted to know more about it, and it was just so much cooler once we actually read this book and you got to like take these stories that you know and see them spun in a way that it's like a present day, like young adult fiction book, and these gods and goddesses are like characters within the book. I just loved it. I loved putting the puzzle pieces together. Whenever like certain things would happen, you would like recognize characters that were being revealed as like characters you knew from stories, and it just, I loved it so much. This whole series I just loved. I need to continue. I actually haven't read like the Heroes of Olympus and the Kane Chronicles and Magnus Chase. Like, I haven't read the rest of this world, and I know it's supposed to, it's all supposed to be so good. But this series and this book, like, I don't know that I've ever been so excited to go to school as I was when we were reading this book in my English class. Like, I was obsessed with it. I still love the cover. Like, the cover of this book is so cool. I love the artwork. These are my favorite colors, if you can't tell. But I loved Percy Jackson, and I literally, after reading this in school, we got to like borrow a copy from the school. I like made my parents buy it for me, and I immediately reread it because I just loved it so much. And it was just a moment in time. I loved it. The Lightning Thief, it just, never forget it. So the next book, I kind of have a little mini story behind this. The next book that I would again sell my soul to read again for the first time is A Walk to Remember by Nicholas Sparks. Nicholas Sparks was the first author that I ever like really invested in and found and knew that I liked and like wanted to read all of their books. I remember I was in like junior high, like 7th grade, I think, about that age. I went through a period where like me and my mom were going to our public library, and I just found a Nicholas Sparks book. I cannot remember what the first one was that I read, and it drives me crazy. I think it was The Notebook. I don't know, but I just loved it. And after reading that book, I went through every single book that he had ever written. Like, at that point, I read every single Nicholas Sparks book that my library had to offer. I made my way through the entire shelf, and A Walk to Remember was always my favorite. I will never forget the first time I read this book, because I feel like it's the first book that ever like hurt me, I would say. It's the first book that ever just completely was a great story, but had a plot twist within it that just blindsided me and threw me for a loop, and truly, like, this honestly might be the first book that ever made me cry. That's a lie. New Moon, for sure. I'm getting war flashbacks. We can't talk about that right now. But this book, I loved the romance within it. And I honestly, I blame this book for my obsession with the enemies to lovers trope, because truly set the scene for it. If you guys don't know what this book's about, it's also a movie, which you might have seen and not realized it was based on a book. But pretty much this book is set, I want to say it's set in the 50s. Yes, it's set in the 50s. It follows this guy named Landon Carter. Landon is like the popular bad boy rebel of the school. He's like way too cool for school, way too cool to hang out with anyone or acknowledge anybody outside of his little clique. And he just thinks he owns the place. He's on top of the world. But at the start of this story, Landon and his friends end up getting into a bad situation, and they end up getting caught, and Landon is the one that basically ends up taking the heat and taking the fall for what they did. And part of his punishment is he has to do several different things to kind of make up for it. Like, he has to be a part of the school play. He has to like help tutor students and be in like a mentor program. There's like several things that he has to do. And in the process of doing these things, he finds himself around this girl named Jamie an awful lot. And Jamie is the polar opposite of Landon. She is kind of the school nerd, the school outcast. Her dad is the local pastor in town, and she's very religious. She's very sweet, but she's very, you know, keeps to herself, and she doesn't really have any friends. And Landon's group has been known for like straight up bullying Jamie, because she's just, you know, she's unapologetically herself, but she's a nice little good girl, and that is not what Landon is at all. And you know, initially they don't get along, kind of grumpy sunshine. She tries to befriend him, and he doesn't care to be her friend, but the more time they spend together, the more that Landon realizes there's like more to Jamie than he originally thought. They end up like bonding again, total like enemies to lovers situation. Such a good freaking romance and love story. It's been a long time since I've read this, but I still just like remember it. Again, the butterflies, just the character development within this is just absolutely yes. But again, like I said, big plot twist, no one sees coming. That just, it's a crazy story. And the first time I read this, I was just baffled, in shock. I just couldn't believe my eyes, and I feel like my mother walked in on me sobbing into this book. Like, I vividly remember that. She probably doesn't, but yeah, it was a roller coaster, but I loved this book so much, and I need to reread it soon, honestly. I saw this on my shelf, and this is what made me want to film this video, because I was like, I need to, oh my god, I need to reread that. I wish I could reread it. Like, I just had this whole train of thought. So here we are. Yeah, if you haven't read A Walk to Remember, and if you haven't watched the freaking movie, this is one of the rare cases where I feel like the movie is just as good as the book. I said that, and I mean it. It's just, yes. The next book is another one that I read in school, believe it or not. There's probably a lot of people watching this, or probably not, because they're not book people and they're not here, but I was that nerd in school that genuinely loved reading books. I hated reading books that I didn't like. If I found them boring, I couldn't get into them. I couldn't do the homework. I wasn't about it. But if it was an interesting book, I freaking loved. I loved it. I loved going to school and waiting for English class so that we could read the book, and I freaking having to wait. Oh my god. The suspense between having to wait for the next day of school to like continue the book whenever you really loved it. It was painful. But yeah, this book, even though I raved about The Lightning Thief and I raved about Harry Potter I feel like was a different situation, because that was just like, again, my kooky second grade teacher reading that to us for fun. This was my favorite book that we had to read in school for like assignment purposes, I would say. Like, when I read this book, it became my entire personality for probably 6 months after. Again, it was a book I went home and I read over and over again. I watched the movie on repeat. It was like all I was thinking about. Quotes from this book were like my quotes in my little Facebook quote bar on the side. Y'all are probably too young to even know what I'm talking about. You used to be able to like put your favorite quotes in your bio on Facebook. Like, I was all about it. It is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This book is literally so old. It's from 1967. I looked at it before I started this video. I said that's literally so old. That's literally the year my mother was born. So not old at all. Very young, in fact. But yes, if you do not know what this book is about, it basically follows this boy named Pony Boy. If you've ever heard the quote, "Stay gold, Pony Boy," it's from this book. I feel like I hear it said all the time, and I think people like don't even realize where it came from. It's from The Outsiders. Pony Boy is a 14-year-old boy. He lives with his two older brothers, Soda Pop and Derry. Their parents somewhat recently died in a car accident, and now Derry is Soda Pop and Pony Boy's legal guardian. He's very young and he's like trying to take care of them. And the thing about this family is they live in this very sort of small, cliquey town. It is very much like a West Side Story or Outer Banks sort of situation. You've got two groups, pretty much the poor groups from the bad side of the tracks, the greasers. That's what their family is. And then you have the Socs, and they are kind of like the kooks in Outer Banks. And this story pretty much just takes place over 2 weeks in Pony Boy's life, where you see how he feels like an outsider in his town, and he struggles with that. And you get to see this like rivalry between these two different gangs. And pretty much one night, Pony Boy and his good friend Johnny, who is also a greaser, find themselves in a situation with some Socs, and things go way too far, and Pony Boy and Johnny are on the run after that, and it's just like a wild ride after that. So many things happen in this book. It's like hard to even explain what the genre of this book really is, because it's like there is some romance, but there's kind of some like thrillery aspects, because literally you're just like on the edge of your seat for so much of this book. Kind of stressed out, honestly, but also there's so many like beautiful poetic quotes and lines from this, and so many just like beautiful life lessons. And it's also very like heartbreaking. Like there's just so many elements to this book, and I was so obsessed with it when I first read it. Like I read it over and over again. I probably read it like 10 times, honestly. Like that's how much I loved it. It's been quite a while since I've read it again. I need to honestly reread it, but God, I remember in class just being so excited to go back and read this book, and then we got to watch the movie. Just so good, so good. It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. If you haven't read it, it's a quick one, honestly. Just do it. I totally recommend it. Okay, now these last two books are totally different from anything we've discussed thus far because they're books I read kind of recently. They're not books that I wish I could read for the first time again because I necessarily, no, I mean, I loved these books, but I wish I would have read them within different circumstances, if that makes sense. I'm gonna explain as I go, but pretty much the first book I want to talk about is The Spanish Love Deception by Elena Armas. You guys, if you've been here for a while, you might remember the first time I read this book, the only time I read this book, was in my very first book battle I did on this channel. It's a little thing I do where I read two books that I know are very similar to one another, have really similar tropes, really similar concepts, and I read them back to back, I vlog it, and then I pretty much declare between the two which one is my favorite. And I read The Spanish Love Deception along with The Hating Game because they are both enemies to lovers, workplace romances, super, super similar in what happens in these books, and the tropes and the concepts and just even the situations within these books very much mirror each other. And the thing was, The Hating Game ended up being one of my absolute favorite books of all time, if not my favorite book of all time, like when I read it. It's in like my top 3. And I read it first in that book battle. And after reading it, I was so obsessed in love with that book that when it came time to start this one, all I could do was compare it to The Hating Game. Because again, I loved it so much. Any book I would have read after it, I would have compared to The Hating Game. But what made this even worse is like these books are so similar. And I think because I was just comparing everything that was happening in this to The Hating Game and feeling like it was almost like a copy of The Hating Game. I didn't feel like it was, but again, like so many things that happen in this also happen in The Hating Game. So it's like, you're like, okay, I just read this, but like it was better in The Hating Game. I just feel like what I'm trying to say here is if I would have read this book just separately on its own, far apart from The Hating Game, without even having The Hating Game like in my brain at the time, I think no matter what, if I would have read The Hating Game first, I would have had to compare this to that. I just think I would have liked it so much more. I think I was just in comparison mode, and because I had just read like my new favorite book of all time, it was impossible to like give this book a fully fair shot. And I wish that I don't wish it, because honestly, I loved that video. I still love going back and watching that video. I still know that I like The Hating Game better than I liked this book, but it really is so good and so many people love it, and I'm in on the love, but I'm also like, I feel like I didn't get to experience what so many people got to experience the first time they read it because I was comparing it. I'm totally just like repeating myself over and over, but this book is really good, and yeah, I wish I could read it again in a different situation and just fall in love with it on its own rather than falling in love with it after The Hating Game. So, yeah. And the last book I want to talk about is one that I read fairly recently. It was the last book I read in 2021, actually. A Thousand Boy Kisses by Tilly Cole. I love this book so much. I do just wish that I could read it again, because the thing about this book is it's the saddest, most heart-wrenching thing I have ever read in my life. This book, I cried, and I swear to God, like every other chapter of this book. It was so beautiful. It was so well done, but it was freaking rough. And the reason I wish I could read it again for the first time is because I read this on a family vacation. I literally read this on my Christmas vacation this past year, and I was reading it like around my family. Like there was no escape. I was in like a log cabin in the middle of the woods, basically, and we were like snowed in at times, and I'm like sitting there on the couch with like my cousins at the end of my feet and like my parents right here, and I'm like reading my Kindle, And I'm like trying to hold back sobs, and I'm just like, I couldn't put the book down though. I flew through it in like 2 days. I was reading it in the car, and I was like having to force myself not to cry, and was like going in the bathroom crying after this book and like crying myself to sleep at night. And I just wish if I could do it over again, I kind of wish that I could just have read this on my own in the comfort of my apartment with like a fat box of tissues next to me, and like ordered a pizza and like a lava crunch cake from Domino's, and just sobbed and like wallowed in my feelings. There are very few books that like truly make me feel and make me hurt and remind me that I have emotions, and this book 100% did that, but I kind of like prevented it from doing that by reading it in a situation where I couldn't like fully embrace the emotions. Part of me though is like, is this a good thing? Because it probably would have depressed me for like a week straight if I read this just on my own and let myself wallow. But yeah, if I could do it over again, I wish I would have read this book in a different way and not on a family vacation, and just let myself cry and let myself feel. But yeah, guys, that is it. Those are all of the books that I would sell my soul to read again for the first time. Lots of different books, lots of different genres, lots of different like release dates and eras that these books are from. I know this was kind of all over the place, but I hope you guys liked it. I like to switch it up sometimes and give you guys some new stuff and talk about some books I don't always talk about. So if you guys have any books that you would sell your soul, that's so dramatic and harsh, but just books that you wish you could read again for the first time, I would love to hear them down below. I love to talk about this kind of stuff. If you guys have read any of these books, as always, I love to hear your thoughts. I love to chat with you, but yeah, that is it for me today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!